Famous explorers. John Cabot. Introduction. What does explore mean? It means to travel to a new place, to learn more about it. You can explore an area near your house, or you can explore a new town with your family. When we think of explorers, we usually think of famous explorers like Christopher Columbus. But there were explorers long before Columbus sailed for the New World in 1492. And there are still explorers today, like space astronauts. Want to explore? In this series of books, we will learn about some of the world's most famous explorers. Who was John Cabot? John Cabot was an Italian explorer and navigator who was under the service of King Henry VII of England. Cabot was born in Italy, but like other explorers such as Christopher Columbus, Cabot had to go from king to king to get help to go on his expeditions. He visited parts of North America in 1497, so he was the first European to see this area since the Norse Vikings had discovered it around the year 1000. Like other explorers, he thought he had reached Asia when he landed in North America. Early years. He was born in Italy, but the name John Cabot doesn't sound very Italian, does it? He was born in Italy in 1450, and his Italian name is Giovanni Caboto. Historians aren't sure exactly where he was born. Some think he might have been born in Genoa, the birthplace of another famous explorer, Christopher Columbus. His father was a spice merchant named Julio Caboto. In 1461, when he was just 11 years old, he and his family moved to Venice. This was an important move because he learned how to sail in Venice. Venice. In 1476, after living in Venice for 15 years, Cabot became a Venetian citizen. This was important because only citizens could become sea traders. At this time in history, Venice was a very wealthy city because of its trade with places in the Levant, the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea, and in Asia. He began sailing and working as a merchant. He probably traveled as far as Mecca, which was an important center of trade at this time. Since he was trading in spices from Asia, could he already be planning a voyage to Asia? Becoming interested in exploration. During the time he was trading in spices in the Levant, Cabot began studying navigation as well as cartography. At this time, many European explorers were sure that there was a way to sail to Asia instead of traveling on the long journey overland. Cabot had already heard about Bartolomé Diaz. He had successfully sailed around the southern tip of Africa, hoping to find India. Cabot also knew about Christopher Columbus sailing west across the Atlantic looking for Asia. Cabot grew more interested in sailing west. Troubles in Venice. In 1474, Cabot married a young woman named Matea. They had 3 sons, Ludovico, Sancto, and Sebastiano. Sebastiano would eventually become an explorer like his father. Cabot was involved in building houses in Venice at this time, but he began to lose money and owed a lot of money to people in Venice. Things were not going well for Cabot, so he and his family left Venice on November 5th, 1488. They moved to Valencia, Spain. It is possible he was in Valencia when Columbus returned from one of his famous voyages. Spain. While he lived in Spain, Cabot made plans to improve the harbor in Valencia, but his plans were rejected. In 1494, he moved his family to Seville, another city in Spain. Here he drew plans to build a bridge and was given a contract to get started on the project. But the project was never completed. Cabot was still thinking about sailing across the Atlantic Ocean, but He needed money. He looked for people to give him money in Seville, Spain, and Lisbon, Portugal, but was unsuccessful. Then he came up with an idea. Sailing for England. Cabot heard that he could get help in England for his voyage, so he and his family sailed from Spain to Bristol, England in 1495. Bristol was a port city, and other explorers had departed on their expeditions from this city. Cabot had a very simple plan. He knew that if he sailed from a northerly city like Bristol and sailed west across the Atlantic, the trip would be shorter than Columbus's voyages. Columbus had used the trade winds on his voyages, and his journeys had taken a long time. Now it was time to talk to the king. Success. Cabot had a simple argument to convince King Henry VII of England to help him. He asked the king, why should Spain claim all the land in the New World? Why not England? King Henry VII liked this idea and gave Cabot and his son a small ship called Matthew and a crew of 18 men. The Matthew weighed about 50 tons, and although it was a small ship, it was a fast ship. The king gave Cabot his assignment. Cabot was to seek out, discover, and find new lands for England. It was time to sail for the New World. First voyage. The king had given Cabot a ship, a crew, supplies for the voyage, and permission to sail. Historians don't know very much about Cabot's first voyage, but they do know one thing for sure. It was not a success. Cabot and his crew of 18 men left on the Matthew from Bristol sometime in 1496, probably in the summer. Several things went wrong. First, he had some troubles with his crew. Second, they ran out of supplies. And third, they ran into stormy weather. There was nothing to do but to turn around and return to Bristol. Second voyage. They returned to Bristol and waited until winter was over to set out again. Cabot and his crew left Bristol the following spring in May 1497. The ship carried enough supplies to last 8 months. This time they were successful. On June 24th, 1497, just 50 days after leaving Bristol, the crew of the Matthew spotted land in the distance. It was the east coast of North America. Historians are not exactly sure where they landed. There are several possibilities: Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, Labrador, or Maine. Planting the flag. When Cabot and his crew landed, they did not stay very long. They saw the remains of a fire, nets, a wooden tool, and a human trail. They most likely did not want to get involved in any problems with the indigenous people, so they collected water to put on the Matthew for the return trip to Bristol. Then they planted a flag to claim the land for King Henry VII and left. They spent some time sailing up and down the coast, observing the land before returning to Bristol. Like Columbus, Cabot believed he had found Asia. Final voyage. As soon as he arrived in Bristol, Cabot traveled to London to see the king. The king was pleased with Cabot's successful voyage, so he gave Cabot 5 ships and a crew of 300 men for another trip across the Atlantic Ocean. Cabot left Bristol in May 1498. The ships carried caps, cloth, lace, and other things to trade with indigenous people in North America. Cabot explored the East Coast as far south as the Caribbean island. This expedition lasted for 2 years, and Cabot and his ships didn't return to Bristol until 1500. How the world remembers John Cabot. The world remembers John Cabot as the explorer who traveled from Bristol, England, and landed somewhere on the east coast of North America. He was the first European to land in North America. This was about 500 years after Leif Erikson, the Viking, discovered North America. Cabot made several voyages and explored the coast as far south as the Caribbean. Eventually, England would become more and more interested in North America and establish colonies there. Here are some of the ways that the world remembers John Cabot. Cabot Circus, Shopping Mall, Bristol. Cabot Links, Inverness, Nova Scotia. Cabot Square, London. Cabot Square, Montreal. Cabot Tower, Bristol, England. Cabot Tower, St. John's, Newfoundland. Cabot Trail, Cape Breton Highlands. Giovanni Caboto Club, Windsor, Ontario. John Cabot Academy, Bristol. John Cabot University, Rome. Matthew, replica of Cabot's original ship, Bristol. Matthew, replica of Cabot's original ship, Cape Bonavista.